I say this in case we become bad, Alyosha went on. But there's no reason why we should become bad, is there, boys? Let us be first and above all kind, then honest, and then let us never forget each other. I say that again. I give you my word for my part that I'll never forget one of you. Well, hello and welcome to our last installment of the Brothers Karamazov and our look at the end of the novel, and in particular at books 11 and 12. And I just read to you a section from the epilogue from Alyosha where he is speaking to the young boys. And as I'm sure you've noticed, as the novel closes out and as we deal with the murder and the drama relating to each of the boys, the final image that Dostoevsky wants to bring to us is how to pass on eternal memory to the young people, to the young boys. This is, at the end of the day, really a book about the young and about sacred memory. And that's why I think it's appropriate for a school to be discussing this novel. And so we are going to wrap up our look at this novel, but we always want to keep in mind the schoolboys and why this is appropriate for schools and what it has that is valuable that we want to carry on to our young people. So in looking at book 11, we are beginning with looking at Dmitri and how he approaches his conviction and what's happening with him. So let's take a look at that. I think it's interesting that when Alyosha visits Dmitri in prison, he is upset because Rakitin has been trying to undermine his faith in God. But he isn't able to, and I think that's what's important and leads to Dmitri's unshakable faith and resolve to have some type of penance in his life. So Dmitri's faith, at the end of the day, is unshaken by the scornful comments of Rakitin. Innocent though he knows himself to be, Dmitri is actually, at the beginning, ready to go to Siberia. He says he's going to go, quote, for all of the babes, and because we are all responsible for all. And again, these words from Father Zosima are echoing throughout the entire novel. Even though Dmitri did not kill his father, he's willing to be responsible for all and to undergo some type of punishment. And Dostoevsky is probably drawing upon his own memories of his own imprisonment when he has Dmitri exclaim, "One cannot exist in prison without God. It's even more impossible than out of prison. And then we men underground will sing from the bowels of the earth a tragic hymn to God, with whom is joy. Hail to God and his joy. I love him." So Dmitri is ready to suffer for the Lord. He knows that he will need the Lord, and he is approaching it in terms of someone who is responsible for all. Now, this is kind of where sometimes readers get a little confused or troubled. There's a lot of ink spread about this particular part of the novel because, as you know, Ivan is planning an escape for Dmitri. So how does that all fit together? Does Dostoevsky approve of Dmitri getting out of his escape? There's definitely different theories. I want to share one with you that I think is compelling. I've used this book before. This is Paul Contino. And I like it because he reminds us that Alyosha accepts Dmitri's escape. And this is really Dostoevsky who refuses to be pigeonholed. Because though Mitya is guilty of much, he's not a saint. He is innocent of the murder of his father. 20 years in Siberia without Grushenka would be a disproportionate punishment. And given his impulsive character, it would be an imprudent burden for him to shoulder. In his fledgling desire to serve, he is unready for such a burden. And if you remember, the elder in his last discourse said the following: know measure, know the proper time, study that. Well, that is what Alyosha is doing as the disciple of the elder. He is discerning, he is measuring, he is using prudence when he studies Dimitri's case. Indeed, the novel's Christian vision of responsibility and active love demand discernment in the middle of complicated circumstances. Dostoevsky believed people enact their freedom in complex circumstances. So there's just this painstaking effort here to be attentive to the particular circumstances of each person, to the particular type of grace that the Lord is giving to a person, and to the limits, one's limits. I think I'm very comfortable with this interpretation. Not everybody is, but I do think that is a vision from an author who is realistic and in the trenches with different types of people on the quest for sanctity. And it's not one size fits all. And I can't help but be struck by how Dostoevsky is reminding us that Mitya is a Christ figure. One thing to draw your attention to when he is going through his time with the lawyers and the trial, there is that poignant scene where there's vinegar on his head, and we are definitely meant to think about Christ and the vinegar on the cross. So there's definitely parallels with Christ, even though he doesn't take that full suffering, it looks like, and that he is going to accept Ivan's plan to escape to Siberia. And once Alyosha approves, that's it. Now, speaking of Alyosha, this is moving on to number 2. Alyosha is really haunted by the words that Dmitri says to him. His parting words to him are to remember Ivan. So as we're closing up this novel and Dmitri is working out his salvation and Alyosha has worked out his, the reader is really left with this haunting sense of what's going to happen to Ivan. And indeed, we are wondering that as well. So that's going to lead us to number 3, looking at Ivan's tormented mind as he starts to weigh his own culpability for the murder. And I asked you to think about remembering and forgetting, because that is the central poetic device in this novel. What do the characters remember? What do they forget? And how does all of that come together into this magnificent portrayal of the importance of sacred memory at the very end? But what about Ivan and his memories? He is starting to go through the events that happened, and he is starting to realize that he maybe played a role in what happened. But what kind of role did he play? I think there's a lot of nuances there. So in looking at what happens to Ivan and his tormented mind, of course, we have to discuss his dialogue with the devil. When Dostoevsky writes this portrait of the devil, he takes great pains to present him in earthly terms. So if you notice, the devil doesn't have wings. He's not frightening looking. He is a sort of outdated Russian social type. Because Ivan keeps insisting that the devil is just a figment of his imagination, Dostoevsky ironically gives him this solid embodiment. He's this down at heels member of the landed gentry. He's a gentleman who can no longer support himself because his income has vanished because of the abolition of serfdom. But, you know, he still has the French phrase here and there. His clothes are good, but a little bit out of style. And he lives on a Russian word called Przyjacielczyk. I'm sure I'm not saying it right, but basically that means a sponger. Someone who relies on more affluent relatives and friends, people who continue to offer him hospitality because he has good manners and he's a gentleman. This is very symbolic for Dostoevsky because religion itself, from Dostoevsky's point of view, was now a hanger-on in Russian educated society. It was this acceptable relic of the past, but hardly exercising its old power and influence. And so Dostoevsky's just kind of playing with this and doing that. And so Ivan, in speaking to this devil, and I think Dostoevsky at times make it seem like he's real, and at times makes it seem like he isn't. We're really coming to grips with his mind, Ivan's mind becoming split, because there is a part of him that knows God exists and good exists, and he doesn't know how to explain everything that's happened. He knows he was not the best son in terms of his discussions with Smerdyakov, so he has some type of guilt for the murder, and he cannot fit all of this in his Euclidean mindset, and this is why he has a breakdown, and it affects him very strongly. And if you look at the pictures that we gave you of the three brothers a year ago, I had put Ivan there with a glass of water for this very scene here, because as he is struggling with the truth and his own limitations, he loses it in the courtroom. And there are some scholars who think this is when he's actually shifting from pride to humility. He says in the courtroom, "It's a spectacle they want, bread and circuses. Though I am one to talk, have you any water? Give me a drink for Christ's sake." And he suddenly clutched his head. In this self-critical pause, Ivan suddenly realizes his pride and angrily but desperately is asking for help. And he is asking for a drink of water. And Russian commentators here see this water as a symbol of the living water of faith. And I think it's magnificent. What happens for the first time ever? Well, this is the first time Ivan asks for something from Christ. In fact, it's the first time he even says Christ's name. And so when we read that, in the courtroom, it should make a big impression on us as the reader. And unknowingly, Ivan invokes Christ's promises, which may suggest he is moving out of rebellion and maybe into some sort of conversion or receptivity or docility. Because Christ said in Matthew 10, "Whoever gives only a cup of cold water to one of those little ones to drink, because he is a disciple, amen, I say to you, he will surely not lose his reward." And then Ivan goes on to talk about his belief in the devil. He says he's here somewhere, no doubt, under that table. He does say that. And his final words, I think, are very revealing. He says, "Oh, how stupid all this business is. Come, take me instead of him. I didn't come for nothing. Why is everything so stupid?" It seems like he is maybe embracing an alternate vision of reality, but the strain has had a tremendous effect on him. And don't forget, it is his idea to help his brother escape. And that is something that Katya seems to respond to. She views it as self-sacrificial. So I think that's interesting also as well. Another point, there's very interesting points about the scene with the devil. And I'm looking again at Jessica Houghton Wilson's novel on the devil. She has some important things to say about that too. um, right before he calls for the water, he does assert that he knows who the true murderer is. He says, "It was he, not my brother, who killed our father," talking about Smerdyakov. While everyone believes him to be deranged, Ivan insists on publicly confessing. He's testifying to the reality of the devil. And remember, while he's talking, he's clutching his head. So I really do think there is potential redemption in this scene, even though he is very gloomy, and everyone's watching while he's trying to actually overcome the devil inside of himself. Even though we don't have huge proof of redemption, I think Ivan and I think Katya also have a chance for recovery, even though they both sometimes still do disturbing things. I still think there are some doorways of hope there, because even Alyosha will continue to speak about a way out of Ivan having this final damnation. So I think that's important also, okay, when we look at that. Moving on to number 4, I asked you about the 3 lampposts, because I just think that is a beautiful way that Dostoevsky is making a point. There are 3 lampposts when Ivan and Alyosha are speaking to each other. Ivan abruptly leaves Alyosha under the final lamppost and vanishes into the darkness. The narrator also tells us that Smerdyakov lives in a neighborhood that is largely unlit. So there's lots of discussion about darkness and light. And then there is also an initial exchange beneath a lamppost when Alyosha hands Ivan the letter from Lise. And I think this is an important point too, because it's very important to have you notice that surely but quietly, Alyosha consistently says, "It wasn't you who killed father." I really think he is a Christ-like figure, telling Ivan he did not kill his father, because I think Ivan is being ravaged by the accuser, by the enemy, and Alyosha is always someone who is rising above the accuser and quietly but surely telling him that. Now, when Ivan disowns Alyosha at a lamppost and tells him to never speak to him again, he does vanish into the darkness, and Alyosha is beneath the lamppost at the crossroads. However, this is when Ivan goes to speak to Smerdyakov for the 3rd time. So I think that the fact that there's a crossroads at the lamppost is reminding us that this character will have to choose between light and darkness. And we're really just held suspended there. It's not entirely clear what he does, but I like to hold out the avenue for hope. Now, speaking of hope, I wanted to look at our female characters. In number 5, I asked you about Grushenka and Lise, and really I should have put Katerina there as well. I think looking at the women characters is very telling indeed. I think it's fascinating how Dostoevsky is bringing us back once again to the theme of laceration. Remember, the characters lacerate themselves to mock and to undercut one's own intuitive responses to love. It is self-torment. It is forced self-torment because one feels insufficient to receive love. And so when you don't think you're good enough to receive love, you project your laceration onto another person who seems to be more powerful. And of course, one way to do this is to claim the high moral ground and to paint yourself as morally superior. Now, the classic example of this is Katerina in her relationship with Dmitri. We've gone through that. We've looked at the vows. We've looked at their very unhealthy relationship. But I do think it's interesting how Dostoevsky brings her back, right? She comes to the courtroom, she seems to behave, then she throws him under the bus and betrays him. And it seems like she's betraying Dmitri to help Ivan, because she does help Ivan. But then there's that fascinating chapter where she goes to visit Dmitri. And if you notice, it's beautifully written. She is standing in the doorway. And Dmitri looks at her, and the way she is standing in the doorway goes back to the very beginning of the novel when they first met. And for a moment, it seems like Dmitri and Katerina, maybe they do love each other, or are they just deceiving themselves? The ability for self-deception in this novel is profound, and I don't think it's clear. I think the title is, where the truth becomes a lie, or the lie becomes the truth. What is the lie? What is the truth? It's an open-ended question, I think. Maybe they did have some type of love for each other, but now we can really, I think, see the door open, moving out of Eros into Agape, because they want forgiveness from each other. But speaking of forgiveness, isn't it interesting when she and Grushenka meet each other? And Grushenka's not very nice to her, is she? But I think it's fascinating. She has that line that basically says, you know what, Katerina, you and I are the same, but if you save Dmitri, I'll love you and forgive you forever. What is she? I thought that's a fascinating line, because she is anchoring their sisterhood, let's say, in dysfunction. But she's admitting it. She has the humility to say, you know what, you and I have unhealthy relationships with men. And of course, they both do for very different reasons. Katerina's sense of shame at what Dmitri did to her. Grushenka has such a sense of shame that she gave herself to a man. I'm sure she gave herself away to him, and he mistreated her. And then she's left alone in this cold Russian 19th century world as a woman, and yet she makes money. So she has some level of power and independence, but not really the type of power that a woman would want. It's really masculine power. It's power in the business world, but she has it. And so she's saying, you and I are both messed up, but help Dmitri and I'll forgive you. So I just will always think of Grushenka in terms of the onion and the onion story, and I think we could keep looking back at that onion for her own redemption. So, and I mentioned, I think about her appearance. Her appearance has changed, and that's because she has suffered. She is suffering along with Dmitri because she does love him, and what's going to happen to him. So she has changed through suffering, and we all know that sometimes there's no better transformation than suffering. So I think it's beautiful and humble that she recognizes neither she nor Katya is good enough to grant forgiveness, but she acknowledges their kinship. Now, maybe on a darker note is the character of Lise. What an interesting character. If you remember previous chapters back, Lise was a strength to Alyosha. He was able to confide in her. She actually did help him with his mission on the earth. But now we sense kind of a new darkness. Dostoevsky likes to write about mental imbalance that is linked with the devil. And it's quite frightening and pathetic in this chapter. Now, Lise is able to walk again, but Alyosha notices a change for the worse in her mental state. She has begun to revel in sadomasochistic fantasies of destroying both others and herself. And she has actually become the little demon of the chapter's title. And she tells Alyosha, I want disorder. And she says she wants everything to be destroyed. Hopefully you are remembering all of those podcasts where we went over the radical revolutionaries from Russia. That was what they wanted. They wanted disorder. They wanted destruction in their political theories and in their plans to kill the Tsar and have a socialist or a communist takeover. Well, this young lady is feeling that in her blood, in her heart, for her own life, for her domestic life. Because think about it, it doesn't really look like she's going to be able to marry Alyosha now. It doesn't really seem like they're going to be able to. So she's ruining her own chance at being a wife, maybe being a mother, by this anger, this demonic desire to destroy. And Dostoevsky is always saying, here it is in the particular, and then the Russian political system, the way it explodes, that's it on the universal. And that's why Dostoevsky is a prophet. Alyosha admonishes her, but she taunts him. She keeps going. She says, listen, your brother's being tried for murdering his father, and everyone loves having killed his father. That is a temptation Alyosha is saying all the young men and women are being drawn to. We want to kill our father. And who is the father that's being killed? It's the Tsar. Of course, if you know your history, you know the Tsar in Russia was murdered by the people, by the revolutionaries. And Dostoevsky, of course, did not live to see 1917 and the Russian Revolution, when the Tsar and his whole family are killed. But you can sense that Dostoevsky knows there is something coming in his bones. He knows the Tsar is going to be killed. He knows the whole country is hungering for this. They're on this quest to devour, and it starts in these particular domestic stories, but it really grows out into the political realm, and it will affect the whole world. And here at a Catholic school, it is hard not to think of Our Lady's prophecy in Fatima when she says Russia will spread her errors throughout the world. And I think Dostoevsky was right on par with that prophecy. Lise tells Alyosha of a dream in which devils assailing her withdraw when she crosses herself. That's the only answer. Only Jesus can save us from these devils, and Dostoevsky knows that firsthand. But she says the devils return when she begins to revile God out loud. She says it's awful fun, and it takes your breath away. So this evil, intoxicating side of hatred is right here in our faces. And Lise has also been visited by Ivan. Don't miss that. Instead of attempting, like Alyosha, to counter these negative inclinations, he reinforces them, and he is complicit. And they really have a terrible friendship. But she is not completely yet possessed. She does appeal to Alyosha as her only rescuer when she says, Alyosha, save me, because she knows only Christ can save her, and Alyosha is the Christ figure of the novel. At the conclusion of this scene, what does she do? It's not a good sign. She puts her finger in the crack of the door jamb, she slams the door shut, and she mutilates herself as punishment. I am a wretch, wretch, she whispers. Who is she imitating? She is duplicating Ivan's self-castigation as a scoundrel. Let's not forget, Dmitri always called himself a scoundrel as well. That is the temptation. When these characters realize their sin, are they going to fall into self-hatred? Or are they going to cling to what Alyosha represents, this redemption that only Christ can bring? And that picture of Lise, it just leaves us hanging there. Moving on to book 12. As we move on to book 12, notice the beautiful, humble way the narrator opens that last book of the novel. I love it because he opens with humility. Unlike the modern scientific establishment or this foreign imported Western legal system that claims they have scientific accuracy, the narrator says, you know what, I don't remember everything, or gosh, did that happen? I don't know, I don't remember everything. And that is always Dostoevsky's way, because he's always saying, let's not forget, we're human. We are not machines, we are human. He's always bringing back the human element, and it's quite beautiful. So number one, how is this book actually a trial of modern secular psychology, which is incapable of capturing human action because it obscures the powerful spiritual realities at work in the story? And I guess now that I think about it, I kind of gave you the answer in that question, didn't I? Dostoevsky is so... he feels so strongly that when you look at a life, at a human being, and whether or not they are guilty of a crime, you must weigh the nuanced circumstances, and you must pay attention to their spiritual condition. And the way modern lawyers are approaching it does not live up to the dignity of the human person. He's really bringing out all of his talent to show that here. The lawyers for the prosecution and the defense devise elaborate psychological narratives aimed at eliciting the jury's sympathies for or against the defendant. This use of narrative is not done for the sake of the defendant, but for the sake of the lawyers themselves, who wish to display their talents to a national audience. In the end, empathy, storytelling, and emotion become tools for self-aggrandizement, both personal and professional. And at the end of the day, we are wondering, what does this have to do with justice? What does this have to do with the good of the defendant? Nothing. It's a circus, and it's an insult to the dignity of man. So the court system did not get this right. But the reader, of course, knows what really happened, that Mitya did not kill his father, even though he has much to atone for. And that's going to move us to the epilogue, because when the trial ends and the story with the brothers and the Karamazov particular trial, I guess, has a close, what are we left with as readers? We're left with Alyosha's mission, and his mission is to effect young schoolboys and to save them, because we've already seen how they are being led astray, and his presence with them will save them. And I think it's beautiful how Dostoevsky's words, this is number 2 of Alyosha, are reminding us of the elder and memory eternal. I think it's so beautiful because Alyosha is imitating the elder in several ways. Well, first of all, of course, he's imitating Christ by embracing the children around him. Like Christ, Alyosha gathers the children to him. Alyosha draws the young mourners together at the funeral of Ilyusha. While the death of the child is another excuse for Ivan to reject God, Dostoevsky says, hold on. This can also unite community. Grief does not have to just bring division. It can also bring community. Alyosha does not preach about Ilyusha's resurrection, but about the hope that the children's memory of this event will engender goodness in them. Listen, he says, when we recall how we buried Ilyusha, how we loved him in his last days, and how we have been talking like friends all together at this stone, the cruelest and most mocking of us, if we do become so, will not dare to laugh inwardly at having been kind and good at this moment. What's more, perhaps, that one memory may keep him from great evil. So at the end of the novel, in this epilogue, Alyosha focuses on Ilyusha's memory in the lives of those gathered at his grave, and his words recall the elders' words and the elders' memories of childhood. Perhaps these children will ultimately become like the elder, who was long ago saved by the memory of a suffering child. I'm going to read to you the elder's words. He says, "For all my childhood rises up again before me, and I breathe now as I breathed then, with the breast of a little child of 8. Oh my gosh, what a magnificent way to unite all these threads in the 12 books. We've been looking at 12 books, and there's so much darkness there. There's so much to think about. It's an intellectual novel. It's a novel about revolution. It's a novel about the devil. But what does Dostoevsky do? He's taking all of us back. I remember when I was 8 years old, something beautiful. I'm sure you do. He is taking us all back to our memories as a child. And he is saying if we can preserve sacred memory, we can avoid the catastrophic consequences that are coming to us because of our embrace of this false ideology. Which lead to the final words of the novel. This is number 3, our last question, and why the final words of the novel are so important, because that is how he ties it all together. So let's look. The boys cry, "We will remember, we will remember. He was brave, he was good. Oh, how I loved him," exclaimed Polya. Oh, children, dear friends, don't be afraid of life. How good life is when one does something good and just. Yes, yes, the boys repeated enthusiastically. Karamazov, we love you. A voice, probably Kartashov's, cried impulsively. We love you, they all caught it up. There were tears in the eyes of many of them. Hooray for Karamazov, Kolya shouted ecstatically. And may the dead boy's memory live forever, Alyosha added again with feeling. Forever, the boys chimed in again. We keep reading similar sentiments, and the last 3 lines are, hooray for Karamazov, hooray for Karamazov. Why hooray? Because it is this young man who is leading the boys to cheer on a soul who has left this life, but who they hold out hope for eternity. And that will in turn give them hope for their remaining life on this earth. And it all happened through a Karamazov. Of all people, of all families, Dostoevsky is reminding us, no matter how dark our family is, there's Alyosha Karamazov who can bring redemption to his sphere of influence. So I hope that you've enjoyed journeying with this novel with us for this last year. And I hope you'll read it again, because it's a book worth reading again and again. And I hope you pass it on to the young people in your life in true Alyosha fashion.